A poor single dad let a strange girl stay for one night, never knowing she was the daughter of a millionaire. He only meant to open the door for someone shivering in the cold rain. He didn't ask her name, he didn't expect a thank you, and he certainly never imagined that this girl would turn his entire world upside down with a truth no one could have seen coming. What seemed like a small act of kindness became the beginning of a story about fate, choices, and a kind of love that money could never buy. If you're someone who believes in stories that touch the heart, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss the next heartwarming story. That night, Cedar Falls was soaked in rain, not the kind that lashes down in fury, but a cold, steady drizzle, as if the sky itself was holding back a sorrow too heavy to name. Ben Carter walked slowly through the familiar intersection after his late shift. The dim glow of the street lamps reflected off his high-visibility jacket, making his figure stand out against the quiet streets. He was on his way home to the small house where his daughter Maisie was surely fast asleep. But something at the corner made him stop. A girl huddled beneath the awning of an old laundromat, soaked to the bone. Her hair hung in tangled clumps. Her thin jacket clung to her like a second skin. She didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't even look around for help. She just sat there in silence, like someone far too used to being forgotten by the world. Ben kept his distance. He didn't approach, but he called out gently, his voice just loud enough to rise above the rain. "It's late. You shouldn't be out here alone." The girl looked up, startled, her eyes wide, not angry, but guarded. "I don't need anyone's pity," she said, her voice dry and cold like the last wind of winter. Ben didn't flinch. He only said, as if offering something simple and honest, "It's not pity. I've got a place with a roof, hot water, and lights. If you need somewhere to rest until morning, there's a couch." She said nothing. Her gaze stayed fixed on the dark stretch of street beyond. Her shoulders trembled slightly, one arm wrapped around the other like she was holding herself together. And then without a word, she nodded, just once, softly but sincerely. Not because she trusted him, not quite because she felt safe, but because sometimes a person just needs a place to breathe, even if only for a night. They walked side by side, not speaking. When they reached the house, Ben opened the door and turned on a warm yellow light. "Shoes off on the mat," he said softly. "Couch is yours tonight. There's a blanket in the cupboard. Bathroom's on the right. Takes a while for the water to heat up, but it will." She nodded again, a little quicker this time. Ben placed a mug of hot water on the table along with a handwritten note. "If you need to call someone, there's a landline on the wall. Please don't open the bedroom door. My daughter's a light sleeper." The girl, Sophie, sat down, wrapping her hands around the cup. The warmth crept slowly into her frozen fingers. A small house, a stranger, no questions, no judgment, just an open door. And sometimes kindness doesn't need to be more than that. The morning light filtered through the curtains, gentle as a hand, soothing after a stormy sleep. Sophie opened her eyes, momentarily unsure of where she was. A thin blanket lay across her body, a cup of water, now cold, rested on the table, and a faint, warm scent lingered in the air. Everything felt unfamiliar, yet not frightening. Just seconds later, she remembered. She was on the sofa in a small house, the one where a man named Ben had opened the door to her the night before. A burst of laughter rang out from behind the partition wall. A small, chiming voice followed, bright as wind chimes. "Dad, the eggs are burning!" Sophie sat up, ran a hand through her tangled hair, and stepped quietly toward the sound. In the tiny kitchen, a little girl around 6 with softly curled hair was standing on a wooden chair, wielding a wooden spoon like she was commanding the universe. Beside her stood Ben, holding a frying pan, his expression somewhere between embarrassed and patient. The girl turned around when she noticed Sophie. Her wide eyes grew even rounder, then lit up as if she'd just seen something wonderfully exciting. "Are you the princess who slept on the sofa?" she asked, her innocent voice making Sophie laugh. A real laugh, unforced and free. "I suppose I am," Sophie replied, crouching down to meet her gaze. "And who might you be?" "Maisie, 6.5, the girl declared proudly. "Dad said a girl got caught in the rain, so he let you stay over, just like a fairy tale. The only thing missing is a talking cat." Ben turned, his cheeks red from the egg mishap. "We're attempting breakfast," he said, "but we may need a rescue team." Sophie glanced around the kitchen and hesitated. "I'm not exactly a great cook, but I can help clean up the chaos." "Good enough," Ben grinned. "In this house, as long as nothing explodes, you are qualified." The three of them maneuvered through the small space. Maisie spread butter on toast, her hands covered in crumbs, as she hummed an unrecognizable tune. Ben gave the eggs another try. This time they were only slightly burned. Sophie fumbled with the pancake batter, spilling a bit on the floor, which sent Maisie into a fit of giggles. "It's okay," she said, handing Sophie a napkin. "Dad spills stuff all the time." Sophie looked at the little girl, then at Ben. She didn't know why her eyes stung a little. Maybe it was because she wasn't used to kitchens. Or maybe it was because, in all her life, she'd never felt like she belonged in one. They sat down around the small wooden table. The eggs were a bit salty, the pancakes slightly burnt, and the orange juice was probably the only perfect thing, but no one complained. Ben chewed thoughtfully and said with mock seriousness, "I think this might be the best breakfast all week." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "It's only Tuesday." Ben winked. "Exactly, the rest of the week doesn't stand a chance." Maisie nodded solemnly, as if that was the most obvious truth in the world. Sophie giggled, then realized she'd laughed more in the past hour than in the entire month before. And in that moment, in a kitchen filled with the scent of burnt butter and the chatter of a child, Sophie began to understand, family isn't the place you were born into. It's the place where you're seen, where you're heard, and where someone pulls out a chair for you at the table, even when all you bring with you is a pair of rain-soaked shoulders. That afternoon, after washing the dishes and tidying up the kitchen, Ben poured Sophie a glass of water, then hesitated before saying, "I know the owner of the laundromat on Oak Street. They're short-staffed right now. It's nothing fancy, but if you want to give it a try, I can take you over." Sophie went quiet for a few seconds. She wasn't used to people offering her options. No prying, no judgment, just a gentle suggestion, like a small door cracking open at just the right moment. She nodded. The laundromat was right on the corner, its painted sign peeling, windows fogged with steam, and the scent of detergent lingering in the air. The woman behind the counter looked Sophie up and down, not warmly, but not unkindly either. "Are you a friend of Ben?" she asked. Sophie nodded. "Grab this apron. Start now." And just like that, she began. No paperwork, not many questions, just a mountain of towels, uniforms, and the constant hum of dryers spinning like wheels that never stop. The afternoon passed in the aching strain of her arms. Soap worked its way under her nails. Heat flushed her cheeks. Sweat soaked into the old cotton shirt Ben had lent her. Sophie had once been used to leather chairs, boardrooms, and cold, clipped conversations. But here everything smelled strong, of effort, of people, of life. And strangely, she didn't hate it. She just wasn't used to it. Sophie stepped out back, leaning against the weathered brick wall. The wind slipped through a crack and dried the sweat-matted strands of hair clinging to her forehead. She took off her old shoes, the only thing she had left after the night she was robbed, now nearly torn apart at the heel. Her soles burned. A blister had risen on her big toe. She wanted to give up, not because she was weak, but because, for the first time in her life, she was truly standing on her own 2 feet. The next morning, when she opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, she saw a pair of shoes. Bright white, simple, unbranded, new but not flashy, and most importantly, her size. Tucked inside the left shoe was a neatly folded slip of paper in the soft, slanted handwriting. It read, "If you must walk, walk without pain." Sophie stood still for a long time. The morning breeze whispered through the porch rafters. Sparrows chirped quietly on the power lines. And there, in the midst of an ordinary morning with nothing remarkable, was the quietest gift she had ever received. No sender's name, no explanation, just someone who had seen her. And in a world where everything usually comes with conditions, sometimes a pair of well-fitting shoes is the gentlest way of saying you deserve kindness, even if you've never known how to receive it. That night, the wind in Cedar Falls blew stronger than usual. There was no rain, but the chill crept through every seam of clothing, making people hunch their shoulders as they stepped outside. Ben was loading clean laundry into the back of his old truck, each bag neatly folded and labeled with the names of familiar clients. Sophie stood nearby, clutching her thin coat tightly around her. She hadn't had the chance to change yet. "Are you sure you want to come?" Ben asked as he tied the last strap. "It's almost midnight." Sophie nodded. "I want to see how you work. At the very least, I don't want to always be the one being helped." Ben smiled. He didn't say anything else. The truck rolled through quiet, narrow streets. Streetlights stretched out like pale golden threads across the dark night. They stopped at a few homes, dropped off clothes, knocked softly, and moved on. No one opened the door, but sometimes from behind a curtain, a pair of eyes peeked out, then gently closed again. When they reached house number 15, Ben pointed toward the porch. "Want to give it a try? It's a light one." Sophie nodded, took the bag into her arms, and stepped out of the truck. She placed the bag carefully on the doorstep, about to turn around when a loud bark rang out from the backyard. A large, shaggy dog suddenly charged toward her from behind the fence. The gate was ajar. She had no time to react. Panic seized her. She stumbled over the edge of the curb, her ankle twisting sharply as she fell hard to the ground. Her hands scraped against the rough cement, burning with pain. Ben's footsteps came thundering behind her. "Back up!" he shouted as the dog lunged closer. The animal halted just before reaching her, then turned back into the yard as if it had simply been doing its job. But Ben was already kneeling at Sophie's side, the panic in his eyes impossible to hide. "Are you okay?" His voice was hoarse, his hands trembling as they reached for her shoulders. Sophie forced herself upright, swallowing the sharp ache in her ankle. "It's fine, just a little scraped up." Ben didn't answer. He looked at her, then bowed his head, pressing his hand to his forehead, breathing hard as if he'd just come through something terrifying. "I told you to wait in the truck," he murmured. "I thought I could handle it," she said softly, shivering from the cold. He didn't yell, didn't scold, but when he turned away, Sophie saw his shoulders tense. His anger wasn't from annoyance. It was from fear. Fear she'd gotten hurt. Fear something could have happened. Not out of duty, not out of obligation, but simply because he cared. She sat quietly for a moment, then said in a low voice, "No one's ever yelled at me because they were scared I'd get hurt." Ben turned back to her. His gaze softened. He didn't speak, just quietly opened the truck door, helped her in, and closed it gently as if she were something fragile. And in that moment, as she pressed a hand to her burning scrape, her tears began to fall. Not from the physical pain, but because, for the first time, someone truly cared about her. Not because of who her father was, not because of any role she played, but simply because she was herself. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently through the windows of the laundromat on Oak Street. Sophie stood behind the counter, her hands swiftly folding white towels into neat stacks. There were fewer customers today, and she was grateful for that. Her ankles still ached slightly from the fall the night before, but that wasn't what weighed heaviest on her heart. Ben hadn't mentioned what had happened, but from the look in his eyes, Sophie knew he was still thinking about it. Not with blame, just with quiet concern. As she opened a laundry bag from an unfamiliar customer to begin sorting, Sophie froze. Nestled near the top of the pile, between layers of towels and button-down shirts, was something that caught the light. A necklace, delicate, fine, and beautifully crafted. She held her breath. It was the sapphire pendant, the teardrop-shaped gem, crystal clear, set in a band of white gold, so fine it looked like it melted into the skin. She'd thought she had hidden it well, tucked deep inside the lining of her travel bag, but somehow it had ended up here before she could put it away. A low voice spoke from behind. "That," Ben stepped forward, his eyes locked onto the necklace in her hand, then lifted slowly, shifting from surprise to quiet confusion, "isn't something a homeless person usually carries." There was no anger in his tone, just stillness and the unmistakable sense that something important had just changed. Sophie didn't speak right away. She tightened her fingers around the chain, then slowly laid it on the counter. "You're right," she exhaled softly. "It's not." Ben waited. No pushing, no pressure. "I'm Sophie Blake," she said, her eyes no longer meeting his. daughter of Richard Blake, CEO of Blake Holdings. The silence that followed stretched longer than expected. Then why are you here? Because I don't want to be there anymore, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I was tired of being watched, controlled, turned into the person everyone expected. I ran away, changed my SIM card, threw away my wallet, kept only a few things like that necklace. It used to belong to my mom. Ben said nothing. He just looked at her, as if trying to reconcile the girl who'd shared breakfast with him these past few mornings, who had hobbled on a bleeding ankle, who had scrubbed towels in steaming basins of water. I wasn't trying to fool you, she added. I just didn't know when I'd trust someone enough to tell them. Holding something back is still a kind of lie, Ben said quietly, not accusing but unable to hide the sting of disappointment. Before Sophie could respond, the shop's bell chimed. A stranger stepped in, wearing a leather jacket and a low-brimmed cap. He didn't look at anyone. He simply raised his phone and, with a sharp click, took a photo. Got it, he muttered. 5 days missing, and here she is, folding towels in a laundromat. Sophie went pale. Ben immediately stepped between her and the camera. Who are you? Just someone who got hired, the man said with a smirk. Her father wanted to know where his daughter was. Pays very well for that kind of info. Ben's jaw tightened. Leave now. You can't stop this, the man replied, backing toward the door, still snapping photos. A girl like her, she can't hide forever. As the glass door clicked shut behind him, Sophie collapsed onto a wooden chair, burying her face in her hands. Ben stood there frozen, not because of who she was, but because he knew someone had just stolen the only sense of safety she'd just begun to find. It rained again. Not like the first night they met, no sudden downpour, but a steady, lingering drizzle, as if the sky itself mourned something about to be lost. After the unexpected photos at the laundromat, Ben didn't wait. He took Sophie home, told her to pack quickly, only what was truly necessary. Then he made a call next door to an elderly woman with silver hair and a voice soft as linen, someone always ready with open arms when needed. Maisie's staying with Ms. Green tonight, Ben said, throwing on his old raincoat. She's got hot chocolate and comic books. She'll be fine. Sophie nodded, but in her heart, nothing felt fine. They got in the truck. Street lights smeared golden streaks across the fogged windshield. Sophie sat beside him, clutching a small bag to her chest like it held everything left of her life. A life that, from this moment, could veer into something entirely unforeseen. Ben didn't ask if she was ready, didn't tell her what she should do. He just drove, his fingers gently tightening around the wheel, his eyes steady and still, like puddled water in the night. But when the truck turned back onto the small street, they both froze. A sleek black car was parked directly in front of Ben's house, its headlights blazing, splitting the darkness in two. Two men in raincoats stood at the gate, stiff as statues, and between them, tall, silver-haired, with a worn but unwavering face, stood Richard Blake. Ben eased on the brakes, then looked over at Sophie. We can keep driving. She shook her head. No, I can't keep running. They stepped out. Rain hit their shoulders, cold to the bone. Sophie walked slowly. Ben stayed beside her, but never ahead. Richard saw them and blinked. So, you finally show your face, he said without greeting. Ben stayed calm. She's not an object. She wasn't hidden. She just needed a place to breathe. Richard glanced around at the small house, the low roof, the misted windows. Breathe here? He laughed. This house couldn't hold a fraction of what she once had. What do you think you can offer her besides a rusty roof and burnt toast? Sophie lifted her head. Dad, I once had everything except peace. Richard didn't budge. You think love is something wrapped in napkins and served with burnt bread every morning? You don't belong here. Maybe not, she answered, her eyes brimming. But at least here, I get to be myself. Ben didn't interrupt. This wasn't his battle. But when he saw Sophie's shoulders tremble, he reached out and gently touched her back. A silent gesture that said, I'm here. Richard looked at them both and sighed. Come home. The car is waiting. People have seen you here. You don't want the world thinking a Blake girl ran off with someone like this. Sophie didn't answer right away, but when she turned to Ben, her eyes softened. Thank you for not asking anything, for seeing me, even when I couldn't see myself. Ben nodded, unsure he could say anything that would be enough in that moment. Sophie turned away. Her steps were heavy. No one forced her. No one held her back. But it was the kind of walk that comes from surrender. When someone knows they're leaving behind something beautiful simply because they no longer have the strength to fight for it. Ben stood beneath the awning, didn't call after her. He just watched the taillights disappear into the rain, as if he understood that sometimes the most precious things don't leave for lack of love, but because love alone isn't always strong enough to hold them against the weight of everything else. After that rainy night, the little house in Cedar Falls fell into a strange kind of silence. No more morning giggles, no more clinking dishes, or the cheerful scent of burnt toast drifting from the kitchen. Ben woke up earlier than usual, made coffee in silence, and sat for a long time by the window, staring out at the damp, chilly street without knowing what he was looking for. Maisie didn't ask many questions. She was simply quieter, no longer singing little songs while she played. Every night she turned the nightlight up brighter than before. Every morning she lingered at the front door just a bit longer before heading out to the school bus. Ben didn't tell her why Sophie had left. He simply said, "Sometimes people have to go, not because they don't care, but because they haven't figured out how to stay." Maisie started coughing. At first, it was just soft coughs in the middle of the night. Then came the fever, the chills, her lips pale, even under 3 layers of blankets. Ben took her to the neighborhood clinic, thinking it was just a mild cold, but her temperature spiked above 104, her body trembling uncontrollably. He scooped her into his arms and rushed to the car, his hands shaking as he turned the key in the ignition. The Cedar Falls Central Hospital glowed under harsh white lights. Sirens blared. Names were called over the PA system. The cold, sterile hallways made Ben feel like his heart was splintering, piece by piece. A nurse received Maisie, wheeling her into the emergency room while Ben sat in the waiting area, still clutching her small backpack. Inside was a worn, yellow stuffed bear. A financial officer approached, clipboard in hand. "We need to confirm a deposit, around $6,000, to begin testing and IV fluids." Ben stood frozen as if punched in the chest. He pulled out his wallet, counted a few crumpled bills, 130 in total. "Is there a way to split it up? I'll pay in installments. I work 2 jobs." The woman looked at him, not unkindly, but with the familiar expression of someone used to moments where no miracle comes. "I'm sorry, it's policy." And then a voice rang out from the end of the hallway. "I've got it." Ben turned sharply. Sophie stood there, rain dripping from her hair, her dark coat soaked with droplets like she'd run across the entire town. She didn't wait for a reaction, stepped up to the desk, pulled a card from her wallet, and laid it down. "Bill all treatment costs under my name. Room fees, meds, tests, everything." The clerk looked up. "Are you a relative of the patient?" Sophie glanced at Ben, then back. Her voice was soft but steady. "I'm connected, not by blood, but by heart." Ben couldn't say a word. He just looked at her as if in a place that felt numb and indifferent. Someone had come back, not out of duty, not out of obligation, but because she simply couldn't stay away when part of her had never truly left. When the doctor announced that Maisie's condition had stabilized and she could be discharged in a few days, Ben finally exhaled, like he'd only been breathing halfway for days. But Sophie quietly stood, meeting his eyes with a gentle gaze that made no promises. Sophie returned to Minneapolis. The elevator leading to the 28th floor of the tower where her father lived moved almost soundlessly. Only the faint beat of her heart accompanied her, steady and sure, like her footsteps. When the doors opened, the hallway stretched long, its marble floors gleaming, recessed lighting casting a soft glow, and the air so unfamiliar it felt cold. Her father, Richard Blake, stood by the window. The floor-to-ceiling glass offered a panoramic view of the autumn city, skyscrapers glazed in the silver sheen of the late afternoon sun. He didn't turn when he heard her approach. "I figured you'd come back," he said, his voice not raised, but still laced with the power forged from years atop the business world. "I didn't come back," Sophie replied gently. "I came to talk." Richard turned, his eyes flicked quickly over her loosely tousled hair, her worn shoes, and the eyes that no longer held fear. "Your little game has gone on long enough, Sophie. You have an entire future laid out, secure, respectable, and worth being proud of. Don't throw it away over a whim. Sophie stepped fully into the room, not sitting, only standing before him. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm doing something you never allowed me to do, choosing myself. Richard frowned. You don't understand. Real life isn't some fairy tale about love and burnt toast. You need more than that. You deserve more. She smiled faintly. You think I deserve this penthouse? Luxury cars, stock shares, and cocktail parties full of people who don't actually care. I used to think so too. But now I know. I just want a place where someone makes me breakfast in the morning. Even if it's simple. A place where I'm heard, even when I don't say a word. Richard fell silent, his face flickering with something, uncertainty maybe, but he still didn't soften. You'll regret this, he said slowly. You'll grow tired of not having enough, of holding nothing in your hands, of no one looking at you with reverence. Sophie drew a deep breath. I used to have everything, Dad, but no one ever looked at me like I was worth loving, just for being me. In Cedar Falls, I have that, and I'm going back. Richard stared at her for a long time, so long the air itself felt heavier. Finally, he said, that man, he can't give you anything lasting. He can't protect you. He already did, Sophie answered, eyes steady on his. Not with money, but with presence, and that's the only thing I need. She turned and walked away, no regret, no guilt, each step lighter than the last. And for the first time in her life, Sophie wasn't leaving to run away. She was leaving to return. The morning sky over Cedar Falls was unusually clear. Pale clouds stretched across it like ribbons of silk, and sunlight spilled gently over the front steps of the house. Ben stood in the kitchen, wearing a faded gray t-shirt, a spoon in hand as he stirred pancake batter. On the table, a bowl of freshly washed strawberries waited, and Maisie sat cross-legged, busy decorating her lunchbox with stickers. The house had slowly settled back into its usual rhythm, but something in Ben's eyes hadn't quite found peace. He still glanced out the window now and then, as if waiting for something or someone. The knock came just as he flipped the first pancake, soft, even, patient. Ben wiped his hands on a towel and walked to the door. Sophie stood there. Her hair was neatly tied up, a light jacket wrapped around her, a brown paper bag held gently in her arms. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but not tired, just full of feeling. For Maisie, she said, holding out the bag, blueberry muffins, real ones, no preservatives. Ben took the bag, but hadn't yet found his words. Sophie looked at him, then spoke gently, each word slow and carefully chosen. I'm not here to ask for a place to stay, and I'm not here to say goodbye. She swallowed softly, then continued. I'm here to say if there's still space, not just in this house, but in your life, then I want to stay. Not just tonight, but forever. Ben stood still. His heart skipped, then came back stronger, fuller than ever. He couldn't speak. He just looked at her as if trying to believe the person standing in front of him was really back. The soft sound of little footsteps came from the hallway. Maisie peeked her head around the door, still half asleep. Miss Sophie, she squealed, then ran out, her tiny bare feet pattering across the wooden porch. Sophie knelt down, opened the bag, and held out a muffin. I brought these because someone once told me muffins taste best when they're shared. Maisie threw her arms around Sophie's neck. Are you staying for good? Sophie looked up, eyes brimming. She turned to Ben, and this time his eyes no longer held hesitation. She smiled. Yes, for good. No fireworks, no grand declarations, just an ordinary morning with muffins, a child's quiet laughter, and the softest promise a heart can make. I'm not leaving again. 2 months after that morning on the porch, Cedar Falls woke to the scent of fresh pastries and soft laughter dancing in the early breeze. On the corner near the Central Park, a pale blue breakfast truck nestled beneath the trees, its white-striped canvas awning fluttering gently. A simple wooden sign carved with the words, Carter's Corner, breakfast from the heart. Ben stood behind the counter, flipping burritos, his eyes half on the customers, half on Sophie as she poured coffee across the way. And Maisie, wearing a tiny striped apron, carried a basket of sun-shaped stickers, handing them out to the younger guests with a proud voice that declared, "Have a great morning," like a true little owner. In the rain-soaked streets of Cedar Falls, Ben Carter, a single dad, opened his door to Sophie, a shivering stranger, offering her a couch and a mug of hot water with no questions asked. Unbeknownst to him, Sophie was the daughter of a millionaire, fleeing a life of control for a chance to be seen as herself. His simple act of kindness, sheltering her, sharing burnt pancakes with his daughter Maisie, and leaving new shoes for her blistered feet, ignited a bond that transcended wealth and status. When Sophie's identity was revealed and her father's world threatened to pull her back, it was Ben's unwavering presence and her courage to choose authenticity that built a new family, complete with a breakfast truck filled with love and laughter. This story teaches us a profound lesson. True kindness, given without expectation, can transform lives and create homes where none existed. In a world often divided by wealth or circumstance, Ben's open door and Sophie's choice to return remind us that love and belonging are built on seeing someone's heart, not their title. It's a call to offer compassion freely, to embrace vulnerability, and to trust that even the smallest gestures, a pair of shoes, a shared meal, can forge lasting connections. Their journey from a rainy night to a sunlit morning shows that family is chosen, not inherited, and that home is wherever love resides. If this story warmed your heart, share in the comments. Has a simple act of kindness ever changed your life? Tell us where you're watching from and if you believe in choosing your own path. For more stories of hope, courage, and connection, hit subscribe now